This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Petrak, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Petrak. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you're in the right place. And I am very excited about today's guest, CEO of Cardiff Oncology, Mark Erlander. Now, just to give a brief intro on Mark, he holds a PhD from UCLA. He's a 30-year veteran. And the word that I would use to describe Mark is visionary. And during this interview, you're going to see why. So Mark Erlander, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and also to talk a little bit about Cardiff Oncology. Yes, let's do it.
All right. Well, in our pre-show discussion, you spoke about some of the, calculated risks that you've taken in your career. So let's start at the beginning. Take us back when you were at Iowa State. You're a year away from earning a PhD, but then you pivoted. You saw something, but your PhD advisor was telling you not to go forward. Your dad was trying to make you go in a different direction, but you saw a trend. You took a calculated risk. Tell us how you ended up at UCLA.
Well, it was like two different things. So first of all, I was at Iowa State. I did my undergrad at UC Davis, and I wanted to work in agricultural sort of biochemistry, but it became clear that there were not really that many problems to solve as far as scientifically. And so I was looking around, and I was working on a pig model for Parkinson's disease, and got interested in the nervous system. And at the same time, there was really a revolution taking place in science. Genentech had been just formed several years ago. Amgen it just started in 1982, and there was really this incredible explosion of technology that allowed us to now, in the scientific community, to clone genes. It really just changed everything, allowed us to be able to manipulate genes. And I saw that, and I was sitting there looking at what I was doing. I was interested in the nervous system, but I wanted to use those tools, and I decided that I had to learn from the ground up. I had to go to a graduate school where I could learn those techniques and integrate them into the nervous system. And my advisor at the time, I mean, bless his heart, we've kept in touch for over the years, but he just said, well, it's going to be a fad. It's a fad. Don't worry about it. But I realized in my gut that this was really kind of a time where I had to make a decision. And I was glad that I was stuck to my guns, and I did it. And so because of that, I did terminate my PhD. I got a master's there at Iowa State, and went off to the Brain Research Institute at UCLA and really dug into both neuroscience and molecular biology techniques.
Yeah, very brave decision, very forward thinking. And that's a theme through everything I know about you so far. And yeah, that was not a fad, but you had it right in your gut.
But that was definitely not a fad.
Definitely not a fad. So when you were at UCLA, something amazing happened to you there at a coffee shop that really changed a whole therapeutic paradigm. What happened at that coffee shop?
Well, I was working on a project in the nervous system, and as a grad student there, and we were trying to understand and clone a gene that encodes the enzyme that makes a neurotransmitter GABA. And so in humans, 1/3 of our neurons communicate to each other through GABA, a neurotransmitter. But what was the enzyme that actually made that allowed you to make GABA in the neurons? And that was my project, was to identify that. And from that, it turned out that I cloned the gene. I was very excited about it. And I was sitting there thinking about it, and I was at at UCLA. There's a place called the Bomb Shelter just right outside of where I was, and I guess at some point it was a bomb shelter. I don't know, but anyway, anybody from UCLA knows what I'm talking about. And so I was sitting there drinking a cup of coffee, and I was reading the latest Nature, and I went, holy cow! I said, what's going on here? And I was looking at this paper, and I realized that they were talking about the autoantigen for juvenile diabetes. And I realized that what I had cloned actually was that primary autoantigen for juvenile diabetes, which is now called type 1 diabetes. So in other words, this was in people who had type 1 diabetes, they had antibodies that were reacting to self and that self was the gene that I had just cloned. And because of that, I saw that leap, and had nothing to do with neuroscience, but I realized that there was something we had found, we stumbled onto something. And so it turned out, years later now, of course, it's that technology allowed them to develop a blood test, and young people are screened looking for this autoantigen all over the world now. So, but it was really a tangent, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's an amazing story. I mean, talk about a bomb going off in the bomb shelter. What an idea that it really shifted the paradigm there. And, so our listeners may be wondering, how does a guy with a PhD in neuroscience who discovers GAD65 with an application to
Right.
juvenile diabetes end up as the CEO of an oncology company? Tell us how you broke into industry and how that also was a forward look and a calculated risk.
Well, it started, once I finished grad school and went south to Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, San Diego. I was working in Scripps Research Institute, and I was in the molecular biology group there and also studying neuroscience, but I really got interested in genomic technologies. And really at that time, that was back in the 1990s. And this was really an explosion of technology to start to harness the human genome, to be able to then, the promise then was that we would have new medicines, new diagnostics, and because we now could unravel the human genome. And don't forget, in 2003 is when the human genome was first sequenced. So this was really an explosive time, and so I was there at Scripps. And I was thinking about going into academia, but then I got recruited by the chairman, who used to be the chairman of immunology at Scripps. He went over to Johnson & Johnson to run all the R&D, and I was one of the people that he recruited from Scripps. And that he recruited me to be able to develop these genomic technologies for Johnson & Johnson and be able to come up with new targets for drug discovery. So that's how I got started. And I think the other piece to this, Michael, is that when you start unraveling the human genome, you ask yourself, well, what are the first things that this could really impact in medicine? Yeah. And what it really became obvious was it's going to be in oncology. It's going to be oncology diagnostics, and it's going to be oncology therapeutics, simply because we had lots of tumors that patients had that could be dissected, resected, and then we could profile them genomically. And so we learned a lot back in the 90s and early 2000s because of that. And so that's why I really shifted, because I asked myself the question, what am I doing here on this planet? What can I do? How can I use my brain for the better good of humanity? And I realized that I needed to shift into the oncology space because that's where the technologies would enable us to make discoveries. So,
well, a very noble mission that you're on. And now we fast forward 30 years after that, and all those calculated risks, that forward-looking ability that you have, and that noble calling, all are paying off because you're the CEO of Cardiff Oncology, and all that genomics experience is coming into play. But even you were surprised when the data read out. Tell us why you had to shift your strategy based on what the data was telling you.
Yeah, really, I can only accent that, Michael. In the life as a scientist, I think a lot of those people who are listening that have a science background know this, or even if you don't, you got to listen to the data, and you've got to be humble, and you've got to understand that the data is what's speaking. And we at Cardiff Oncology, we were finishing a phase 1b/2 trial in second line, and they were focused on those patients that had a KRAS mutation, so that's about half the population. The data was really, as we were starting to look at it, we realized that there was a subset of patients that actually were doing really well in second line. They had a 73% response rate when normally you'd have about a 20-25% response rate. So we had this huge response, and we were trying to understand, first of all, when something like that happens, and we were looking at the data, the first thing you say is, okay, was there a bias in this trial or something along those lines? You have to be honest. And we went through we went through the analysis and looked at all the different patient characteristics, and it was very clear that the trial was not biased, and we were onto a novel finding. Now, that was really, so then we went to the FDA, and we presented our clinical development plan in second line, and the FDA came back and said, we really think you should consider a first-line clinical development path. Well, one of the main reasons is because it's a lot bigger patient population. Nearly 50,000 patients every year have metastatic colorectal cancer that has the RAS mutation, which is about half the population. And so this was really just a watershed for Cardiff Oncology. We pivoted. We took the chance. We said, look, we've got to pivot. We've got to go to first line. And of course, now we are in the middle of a first line trial that reads out later this year, in the time frame of mid this year. So we're really, but it was really, you had to kind of look at the data and say, okay, we're onto something. We're going to go for it. And I had learned from my past, as we were just talking earlier, listen to the data and be willing to pivot and, measure twice before you cut, but be willing to pivot.
That's really great. I mean, it really reminds me of your situation at Iowa State. You could see it. You weren't scared to pivot. It took bravery, and that's leadership. And so if you think about 1994, you have the foresight to see that genetics is going to be a huge impactor in cancer research. And then 30 years later, here we are, you're leading a whole company moving that concept forward. This episode is brought to you by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. When pharma executives need to make critical hires, they go to the experts at K. Bassman, pharma's one-source staffing solution. Visit kbic.com. Now back to the episode. So what do you see for cancer treatments 30 years into the future?
I think some of it is when we think about cancer therapy now, we do talk a lot about targeted therapies, but the reality is that most patients still get chemotherapy. Now, some of those chemotherapies are very successful, but there's a lot of chemotherapy that is given because there's simply nothing else to give them. And that's true for the case of when you look at colorectal cancer, and specifically these RAS mutated patients that I've been talking about. There has been no new therapies in a generation, 20 years. And the last drug that was approved was actually the Genentech drug Avastin, and that was back in 2004. And before that, approved were chemo cocktails. So that's really what these patients are given is chemo cocktails plus Avastin. Now, I think where we're going, to answer your question, where are we going, is that number one, we want to eliminate chemos where we can replace them with targeted therapies. Let's change a death sentence to a patient to living with the disease. Let's get rid of a lot of the adverse effects and the loss of hair and all the other things and the nausea, and let's try to get drugs that are more and more clean in the sense of adverse events. So I think that is, those are, some people might argue to me that, well, Mark, those are kind of incremental, those are not transformational. But I think that we do need to go after that. And then of course, what everybody's talking about is really more and more personalized medicine, really being able to truly be able to personalize the medicine for a patient.
And how is Cardiff Oncology and other companies really laying the foundation, the runway for that future to be a reality?
Yeah, our target, Cardiff Oncology we have a very selective inhibitor. It's called onvansertib. And onvansertib is a investigational drug that we are developing that it targets a very specific enzyme, only that enzyme. It's an enzyme that tumors actually hijack. They hijack this enzyme and express it such that it allows them to have this uncontrollable growth. And so the target of onvansertib is an enzyme called PLK1. And PLK1 really is an Achilles heel for the tumor. And so we're really going after that. So to answer your question succinctly, we are going after a very specific target. And because of that, we actually have found, we have now we've done 7 clinical trials, nearly 300 patients, and we have a very well tolerated investigational drug, onvansertib. And so I think that's the key is that not only is it going after this specific enzyme, but it's also it's very well tolerated.
That's great. Well, I hope that continues to go well for Cardiff Oncology and, of course, for the patients. And again, just laying that foundation for the future. And at the heart of what the Pharmaverse podcast is, it's a leadership podcast. So let's
Right.
pivot and
Sure.
let's talk a little bit about your leadership findings through the years. What would you say is one of or a few of your top leadership nuggets, or as your daughter would say, you were telling me, pearl us?
Yeah, the pearling. The pearling I give sometimes is actually unsolicited to family members, particularly my daughter is the brunt of many of those. I think when you think about leadership and you think about teams, we're in biotech, and the most important thing is that people are motivated, internally motivated, that they're excited to come to work. They're excited to work together as a team. And I think there's a couple things that are important that allow that to be there. And one of them is, trust and respect. I trust the team around me. I respect the team. I listen to them. I think, talking to people is one thing, but listening is, of course, another thing. And as we all know. So I think listening and to them, and also the most important thing is for them not to feel like they're hamstrung, that you're not giving them the resources, you're not giving them the platform to be able to do their job and excel in their expertise. And people, I think people really react well when they know that you've got their back. You're not going to throw them under the bus in the board meeting. You're not going to, call them out on something. You're going to respect them. You're going to trust them. And I think those are really key things that actually go a long ways. And I think part of that too is be genuine. Be transparent. And if there's something that you don't think is going well, you sit down and talk to the person. First, talk to them yourself. Don't call them out in a meeting. Talk to them just one-on-one. Hey, I think, I'm a little concerned about this. What do you think? That kind of dialogue. I think maybe I've rambled a little bit, but I think the last thing that I would say is that what I like to do is I like to challenge people to go beyond the obvious. It's important to say, well, what about this though? What could we do this? And I think the last thing I will say is that I like people to challenge me in the team. Mm-hmm. I want them to be able to say, well, Mark, I don't know about that. Are you sure we should do it that way? Because I'm thinking this. Challenge when you do a challenge in a constructive way builds kind of that environment where people don't feel like there are any repercussions, later on, and I think that that's important, Michael.
Those are great nuggets, great pearls, for sure. And I wanted just to pull a little bit on that first thing that you said about how motivation is the key. And, as a leader myself, I try to, my perception of leadership initially was that I needed to compel people to move the mission forward. And really what I found is true leaders can impel people. They can trigger a motivation within them that can really motivate them to even achieve beyond what they think they can. Is that in line with what you're thinking?
Michael, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's what it is. It is, from from them internally, them being able to be motivated and to be excited about what they're doing. Because once that happens, then the creative juices turn on, right? Mm-hmm. And we all know that. That's what we want. We want a creative team that works together. And, but I do think that there is that switch, right? Where, you've got the person drudging to work. Oh, I got to go back. I got to go to work today again, versus somebody who's while they're driving in or whether or when they whatever they're thinking, hey, wait a minute, what about this? We should think about this. Hey guys, I had a thought. So I think that those are really, and that's really important. I absolutely agree with you.
Now, most of the CEOs that I've interviewed, they have like an ELT, a leadership team, and that leadership team, of course, are leaders of other people. How do you? What are some keys that you would say in leading leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I do think, it's a cliche, but lead by example is, of course, something that we all say. And I do think that, I think it's all, things in a company, as you know, Michael, they all start from the top. The agenda is set by the CEO. And if the CEO is, it just depends on what kind of CEO it is. If it's one that is really encouraging people to lead their own groups and encouraging and rewarding creativity, I think that goes a long ways. And I certainly, that's how I feel about it. I think, the other thing is that I always tell everybody, I said, look, we all take out the trash here. So, and I obviously we do have somebody that takes our trash out, but but you know the point. And I say, look, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves. Say, well, let's just take a look at this. And I expect, and that kind of trickles down. Everybody's rolling up their sleeve. They're kind of doing their thing, and that can-do attitude, instilling a can-do attitude, is really something that I think enables the other leaders to say, well, yeah, we can do that. This is what we need to do. If we want to do that, I think this is how I would implement that. And so I think those are, some of the other things that I think are important are, 360 reviews. I've done one here just about 6 months ago here at the company. I wanted to show everybody that, look,
Did you get absolutely roasted? I'm no, just kidding. I'm sure it was positive, good
I
feedback.
tell you, the thing is that, we're 32 employees. So I sat down the leadership team and some others that I said, look, guys, I want you to be honest and I want you to be constructive, though. Please try to keep it constructive, okay? And and people were pretty honest,
Yeah.
and I think that that's good, though, and I hope that you know communicated to everybody. Look, Erlander is, he wants to be a better leader. Well, how do you do that? You get feedback and you find out where your faults are, or I don't know if that's the right word, where do you need to work harder? You need to work on those things. And I think that, it's important that you then set the tone of the whole company by saying, look, I want to be a better leader for this company and for you. And this is one way we can do it. And so you show it by actually doing something, not just talking about it.
That's right. And that creates this cycle of accountability. You're like, here, hold
Yes.
me accountable. And then
Yes.
that almost gives you the right to hold them accountable, even though as a CEO, you have the right to hold everybody accountable. But as far as a leadership team, that accountability cycle seems to be a huge piece. And, for me,
That really is. That really is. You hit it spot on.
well, I got to say, one of the failings for me as a leader is being a little non-confrontational and holding people accountable
Yeah.
sometimes is a challenge for me. What are any thoughts there about holding others accountable?
I think that's in general a tough. I don't think you're alone there, Michael. I think that a lot of people, including myself, you would like, you don't want to have those confrontations. They can be kind of uncomfortable. You go out of your comfort zone. You want people to be able to just know how to, to step up and that sort of thing. But I do think that I think it's important that you have several different things that you can do that are quite frankly, are your tools for that. One of them, an obvious one, of course, is your yearly goals. We sit down and we talk about goals. And in fact, for the executive team, those go to the board, and the board has, and also we have corporate goals, and those have to be approved by the board. So I do have, I do have the, you have a bad cop there for you in the board if you choose to do that, and they're not that way. They're just, they're wanting to hold us accountable. And so that trickles down, and I think that that's an important tool that you can use and say, okay, guys, we've got to have SMART goals. They have to be quantitative. They have to, have teeth in them, and we gotta hit them. And by the way, and I really like our board because I think they've said, look, set out your goals, but then also we're open to stretch goals. So let's see what those look like. And I think it's the board has been very fair about it, and they've really allowed us to really go for those goals, those stretch goals. And so I think that's a way to kind of you don't have to always say, hey, confront somebody. Just say, look, this goal is not happening. It's June, and last time I checked, we got to hit this. Yeah. So that kind of conversation.
That makes sense. And, based on our analytics, many of our listeners are not yet leaders. They're sort of aspiring leaders. What pearls would you give to someone who is trying to move into a leadership position?
Well, I think a key thing, of course, is that whatever you're doing, do something that you are passionate about. Because then you will truly excel, and you will also be able to become a leader of it. Now, some people say to me, well, Mark, that sounds great. Sounds like you got your passion. But you know what? I'm not really sure I have a passion in something. And I say to them, well, why don't you do something that you like? Let's talk about that. And then another conversation I've had with some people is they say, look, maybe you don't know what you're good at, but maybe other people have told you what you're good at. That's what actually happened to me. I was in neuroscience, and I was doing these genomic technologies at the same time, and the head of J&J research there said, look, neuroscience is great, but I'm really hiring you because of your excelling in genomic technologies. So I had to understand that sometimes it's about what people think, people know you're good at, and then go for it. Yeah.
Didn't that guy call you a pretty average scientist?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Yeah, he said, I don't know about I'm not really sure you're a neuroscientist, but I know you're good at the genomic technology. Mark, that's what I'm paying you for, okay?
Nice. Well, what other pearls for those folks?
I think the other thing is a couple things. I mean, I think it's really important that you believe in yourself. I mean, people, this is such a cliche, but it's true. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will, right? That kind of thing. And I think the other thing that I feel is important is be opportunistic. When something is presented to you, obviously you want to be careful. You don't want to, measure twice before you cut kind of stuff. But I look at my career life, I think of it as lily pads. And, not that look like a frog, but, it's the idea is that you're leaping from one lily pad to the next, and be willing to take that leap, and when something appears and is there, be opportunistic. And, I think the other thing that's important that I tell myself through the years is never settle for something that is less than what you really want to do and achieve in your career. Don't settle. You'll regret it time and time again after that. So it's really important. I think that, I don't know, those are my just sort of off the cuff thoughts about it.
Well, truly inspiring. I'm glad you shared those. And, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. But I'm sure a lot of the people that are watching are going to want to follow Cardiff Oncology. What's the best way to do that?
Well, we have a website, www.cardiffoncology.com. We've got really an inflection point coming, a data readout, as you know, mid this year in our first line. Exciting times at Cardiff Oncology. We're really on the precipice of being able to make impact in these patients in first line, nearly 50,000 patients that are RAS mutated that have not had something in 20 years, a new therapy. So I really appreciate your time. And I'll just say one thing, one plug to Michael. This is a great forum, a great platform that he has established here. And this is a place where you can come and learn of all the different kinds of people, their backgrounds, and where they are, and how they got to where they are. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do that, Michael.
So thank you. It was great having you. I learned so much, and I know all of our listeners are rooting for you and for Cardiff Oncology. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.